Adoni financially took care of her husband and children for good 15 years from the money she was getting from her little supermarket. Was it worth it?
Welcome to VC's True Life Stories and African Folk Tales. Pick up your popcorn, let's learn and enjoy this story together. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more interesting and educative videos. Thank you.
Femi's life in Lagos was one most men envied. But his perfect world was about to be shattered. Femi is a senior executive at a reputable firm. He had worked his way up from humble beginnings. His wife, Adoni, was a loving and supportive partner, and their bond was admired by many. After years of hard work, Femi's income had provided them with a life of comfort. They lived in a well-appointed house in Lekki, and he made sure to provide all the necessary requirements needed in preparing for the arrival of their first child. He was a reputable man in their community, known for his generosity and strong sense of responsibility. Just before Adoni gave birth, Femi had opened a supermarket for her in the estate, wanting her to have something of her own. It was a moderate investment at first, but he believed that with time, it would grow into a worthy venture. 9 days before their baby's arrival, Femi lost his job unexpectedly. What was meant to be the happiest time of his life now filled him with dread. Femi was devastated. His position at the company had been his identity for years, and now it was gone, swept away in a wave of unexpected layoffs. He came home that day struck with disbelief. How could this happen? Everything he had worked for felt like it was slipping through his fingers. With his wife so close to giving birth, he couldn't bring himself to tell her the news immediately. She was already going through so much. Her health and the baby's well-being were his top priority. As the days passed, the reality of his situation began to sink in. Yes, he had money to take care of his family for months, but he had no stream of income, and finding another job would not be easy. Lagos was competitive, and executives like him were not in high demand. And there was Part 50, his reputation was at stake. He couldn't bear the thought of people discovering his shame, especially at the arrival of his baby and after all he had built. 5 days later, Adoni sensed something was wrong. Femi had become more withdrawn, and his once confident behavior was fading. She pressed him, gently at first, and eventually, he confessed. "I lost my job," he said, barely able to meet her eyes. The weight of his words hung in the air, and for a moment, silence filled the room. Then, to Femi's surprise, Adoni didn't break down or panic. Instead, she calmly asked, "What's our next move?" Adoni's strength in that moment would come to define their next 15 years. She reminded him of the supermarket they had opened and suggested he join her in managing it. "No one has to know," she said softly. "We can continue as we are, and when visitors come, you dress as if you're going to work." Femi was reluctant at first, but Adoni's calm resolve reassured him. Together, they formed a plan, one that would help them survive without tarnishing his reputation. 3 days after they agreed on the plan, Adoni gave birth to a set of twin boys. That day, the air was filled with joy and relief. Femi, despite his inner turmoil, felt a renewed sense of hope. The babies were healthy, and Adoni was glowing with happiness. Their small family was growing, and it reminded Femi of all the things that truly mattered in life. The world outside might have been crumbling, but within their home, there was love, laughter, and warmth. As they prepared to bring the boys home, Adoni's practical nature took over. The baby items they had purchased before Femi lost his job were ready, and the supermarket continued to bring in a steady stream of income. It was modest, but enough to support and cover their needs. The first few weeks with the twins were a blur of sleepless nights for Femi. In all of it, Adoni remained a rock. Femi couldn't help but admire her strength, even as he silently struggled with the burden of his secret. As the months passed, Adoni threw herself into growing the supermarket. She was determined to make it a success, and her hard work paid off. Customers grew to trust her, and word spread of the quality goods she offered. Meanwhile, Femi played his part, waking up each morning, dressing for work, and leaving the house as though he still had a job. He would help in the supermarket quietly, handling few tasks behind the scenes. This continued for 5 good years with Femi doing all he could to get back on his feet. He had several failed interviews and rejections. But Adoni ensured that their routine stayed consistent. Whenever visitors came to their home, Femi maintained the facade of a working man, and Adoni played her role perfectly. She would often give him money in the evenings, so he could present it to her in front of the children or guests for household expenses. Their secret pact strengthened their bond, though the weight of the deception hung heavily on Femi's shoulders. Femi struggled with the feelings of shame that stared at him. For years, he had prided himself on being the provider for his family, and now that role was reversed, his sense of failure grew. Even though Adoni never once made him feel inadequate or less of a man. He often lay awake at night, wondering how long they could keep up with this life. Every day that passed without a new job offer was a reminder of how far he had fallen. Adoni, sensing his inner conflict, would remind him of all the good they still had. "We are surviving, Femi. The children are healthy, the house is warm, and our business is growing. We will be fine." Her words were always gentle, but firm, a reminder that they were in this together. When their twin boys turned 10, Femi and Adoni welcomed a daughter to the family. At first, he didn't want more children, he wanted to get back to his feet before adding more kids to the family. But with his wife's support, the growth in the supermarket and constant job rejections, he decided to allow his wife get pregnant. Adoni had been a respectful and supportive partner despite his situation, and he doesn't want her to feel bad. Their house, once quiet, was now filled with the sounds of children playing, laughing, and occasionally fighting. The twins, now ready to move to secondary school, were full of curiosity and energy. They often asked their father about his work, and Femi would tell them stories of his office and meetings. It pained him to lie to his children, but he knew it was necessary to keep the plan intact. Adoni, ever mindful of her husband's pride, took great care in managing the household finances. She ensured that the children always get everything they need through their father, so that they won't see her as the provider. She made sure the father gives them everything they wanted and that their school fees were always paid on time. She continued to give Femi money each night, so he could provide for the family the next day. Their routine was smooth, and to outsiders, it appeared as though nothing had changed. One afternoon, Femi's parents came to visit. They were proud of the man he had become, and they often spoke of him with admiration. "Our son, the provider," his mother would say, her eyes glowing with pride. Femi felt a lump in his throat every time he heard those words. How could he tell them the truth? How could he admit that for the past 10 years, it was Adoni who had been carrying the weight of the family on her shoulders? Adoni, the ever-tactful one, would smile and offer them drinks and food, deviating their attention with stories about the children or updates on the supermarket. She never let the conversation stay on Femi's job for too long, and for that, Femi was grateful. But the visits from his parents only deepened his sense of failure. He knew the day would come when he would have to face the truth. By the time the twins were already in secondary, the cracks in Femi's lies began to show. Though he continued his routine of dressing up for work, there were days when the pressure became too much. He would sit in the car for hours, lost in thought, unable to bring himself to enter the supermarket. Adoni noticed the change, but she never pushed him too hard. She understood the trauma the situation is giving to him. The children, innocent as they were, had no idea what was happening. They believed their father to be a hardworking man, just as they had always been told. Adoni protected them from the truth, just as she had shielded Femi from the harsh realities of their financial situation. But even she knew that the secret couldn't last forever. As months passed, the burden of Femi's secret began to weigh more heavily on him. The supermarket continued to grow under Adoni's leadership, but Femi felt increasingly disconnected from his role as a provider. Though he had initially agreed to the plan to save face, he now found himself questioning whether it was worth it. The deception had allowed them to survive, but it had also created a cage within him, one that he could no longer ignore. One day, after dropping the children off at school, Femi made a decision. He would stop pretending. He would face the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Adoni, sensing the shift in him, supported his decision. Whatever happens, we will face it together, she said, her hand resting on his shoulder. Femi nodded, grateful for her unwavering strength. The next chapter of their lives was about to begin. The next morning that Femi decided to stop pretending felt different. He woke up earlier than usual, his mind restless. For 13 years, he had played the role of a working man, but today, he would face his reality. He got dressed, not in his usual business attire, but in something more casual. When Adoni saw him, she smiled, understanding that this was the beginning of a new chapter for them. Their children, the twin boys now teenagers and the daughter now 3 years old, were curious about the sudden change. "Dad, why aren't you going to work today?" one of the twins asked, concerned in his voice. Femi sat them down and took a deep breath. "There's something I need to tell you all. For many years, I've been pretending to go to work. I lost my job before you all were born, but your mother and I decided to keep it a secret." The room fell silent as Femi explained everything, how he had lost his job, how Adoni had supported the family, and how they had kept up their appearance for all these years. The children were surprised. They had always believed their father to be the strong, successful man they saw each day. The revelation shook their understanding of their family. "Why didn't you tell us, Dad?" one of the boys asked, his voice tinged with both confusion and admiration. Femi's heart ached as he looked at his children, now seeing him through different eyes. "I didn't want to burden you with the truth. Your mother and I thought it was best to protect you," Femi said, his voice low. Adoni sat beside him, holding his hand, her presence steadying him. Their daughter, the youngest, looked at her mother with wide eyes. "Mom, you did all that for us?" she asked in disbelief. Adoni smiled softly, her humility shining through. "It wasn't just for you. It was for all of us, including your father." The children's shock slowly turned into admiration for their mother. Adoni had always been their pillar of strength, but now they saw the full extent of her sacrifice. She had carried the family on her shoulders without complaint, and in doing so, she had preserved their father's dignity. The twins looked at their mother with a newfound respect. "You're incredible, Mom," one of them said, his voice full of awe. Adoni, ever humble, shook it off. "We do what we must for those we love," she said simply. But Femi knew how much she had given up for him, for their family. He had been a silent witness to her strength for all those years, and now, their children finally understood it too. A few days after Femi's confession to his children, his parents came to visit. His mother, as always, was full of praise for her son. "Femi, my hardworking boy," she said as she sat down in their living room. Femi felt the familiar lump in his throat, but this time, he didn't let it choke him. He glanced at Adoni, who gave him a reassuring nod. With a deep breath, Femi told his parents the truth. He explained how he had lost his job all those years ago and how Adoni had been the one holding the family together. His father listened in silence, his face unreadable, while his mother's eyes filled with tears. "You should have told us," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "But I'm so proud of you both. Adoni, you've been a blessing to our family." Femi's father, a man of few words, finally spoke. "Femi, you're fortunate to have such a woman by your side." His eyes, usually stern, softened as he looked at Adoni. "You've done more than any of us could have asked for. You kept this family intact. We owe you a debt of gratitude." Adoni, as always, tried to downplay her role, but Femi's father insisted. "No, you deserve the recognition." Femi watched as his parents embraced his wife, their appreciation clear in their gestures. It was a moment of deep emotion, one that sealed Adoni's place not just in Femi's heart, but in the hearts of everyone in the family. Later that evening, the twins had questions for their parents. Now teenagers turning to young men themselves, they were eager to understand more about the sacrifices their mother had made. "How did you do it, Mom? How did you manage to keep everything together for so long?" one of them asked, his brow furrowed in thought. Adoni smiled at her sons. "It wasn't easy, but I had your father. Even though he wasn't working, he was always there for us. And we made a good team. The twins exchanged a look, as if seeing their parents in a new light. They had always thought their father was the pillar of the family, but now they understood that their mother had been the quiet force holding them all together. With the truth out in the open, Femi felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He no longer had to pretend, and for the first time in 1 year, he began to actively search for work again. The job market had changed significantly since he had last been employed, and it was a difficult task. But Femi was determined. He wanted to contribute to his family again, not just as a supporter in the supermarket, but as a provider. Adoni encouraged him every step of the way. "Take your time," she would say. "We've survived this long, and we'll keep surviving." Femi knew that no matter how long it took, they would be fine, thanks to Adoni. After 3 months of searching, Femi finally received a call that would change everything. A former colleague had recommended him for a senior position at a reputable firm. It was a prestigious role, one that would restore both his finances and his reputation. Femi couldn't believe his ears. The offer felt like a long-awaited reward for the years of hardship he and Adoni had endured. He rushed home to tell Adoni the news. Her face lit up with joy, and for the first time in a long while, they celebrated a victory together. "I knew something good would come," she said, hugging him tightly. Femi, overcome with emotion, could only whisper, "Thank you, Adoni, for everything." When Femi shared the news with the children, they were very happy. But their daughter was confused. "But Dad, weren't you already working?" their daughter asked, not fully understanding the complexity of the situation. Femi chuckled softly, realizing that while they knew the truth, his daughter was still too young to understand the reality. "We've been managing all this time without me having a job. Your mother is the one who has kept everything going," Femi explained. The children, though happy for their father, were once again reminded of their mother's strength and sacrifice. They knew now that their family's success had never been about one person, but about the quiet partnership between their parents. To celebrate Femi's new job, Adoni organized a small gathering with close family and friends. It was a joyous occasion, filled with laughter, food, and music. Femi's parents attended, beaming with pride, while their children helped to set up for the party. As the party continued, Femi looked around at his family and friends, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude. He had spent years pretending, hiding his shame, but now, everything was out in the open. There were no more secrets, and the weight of those years had finally lifted. He turned to Adoni, who was chatting with a guest, and smiled. She had been his silent pillar, the woman who had held him up when he couldn't stand on his own. And now, they could both stand tall together. "Now over to you, can you do this for anyone? Did you do the same for someone and end up being disappointed?" Like and subscribe for more interesting and educating stories like this. Thank you.